when BEZ and the planning for Printers Row came up with the list and said, who do you want to interview? I saw Danyel Smith's name in her book, and I said, I want that one. And they said, okay. As someone who came of age in the 90s, Vibe magazine was like a Bible when I was at Howard University. So she has been an icon for a long time. I don't really need to read her bio, but we're going to, she's been editor-in-chief at Vibe, first black person, not just black woman, right? Editor-in-chief of Billboard magazine. She's the author of 2 novels, and her latest work is Shine Bright, a very personal history of black women in pop. So without further ado, Danyel.
I thank you for that lovely introduction. Thanks everyone for being here.
So welcome to Chicago. So for those of you who haven't read the book, each chapter talks about 1 or 2 black female singers. And it's also woven in with memoir and Danyel growing up and how these different artists spoke to her. So I know that you probably get asked a lot, well, why didn't you include so-and-so? What about so-and-so? And that really doesn't interest me.
Yes.
What I want to know is not who didn't you choose, but why did you choose the ones that you did? What was the process? So we have Dionne Warwick, Aretha,
We have
Whitney,
Jody Watley.
Jody Watley from Chicago.
Yes.
Who-
I mean, we have so many. We also have Linda Peaches Green from Peaches and Herb. We have Nancy Wilson. We have the great reggae artist Millie Small. We have Mariah. We have Janet. But there are some notable, like Mary J. Blige is not in Shine Bright in a major way. Beyonce kind of closes us out, but more in
but
the
she's
outro.
not really in it that much, and I was really okay with that.
Yes. It's okay. I mean, Shine Bright is a proper merge of memoir and biography, and one of the things that I was really trying to do was pick the women that meant the most to me, personally and professionally, to pick the women that meant the most to my mother and her aunts during their heyday, and to pick the women that meant the most to my grandmother and my great aunts and my grandmother's friends during their heyday. So it goes all the way back. Really, spiritually, it goes all the way back to Phyllis Wheatley, because I got introduced to her when I was a 5th grader in Los Angeles, California. But it really begins with the Ella Fitzgeralds and the people that my grandmother played around her house when I was always over there visiting.
So that's a good way for you to tell the audience, who are you and who are your people? Because, you know, if you had been born in a different decade, there would have been different artists who you chose. So where are you from? Who are your people?
Oh, wow. Okay. So, hi, my name is Danyel Smith. I was born in 1965 in Oakland, California. I come from a family of music lovers. My grandmother's sister Betty owned a record store in the Bay Area called Reed's Records, one of the very few black-owned record stores in the Bay Area at that time. They had it for like 55 years until it finally closed. And I'm a longtime music journalist. I came up in the alternative news weeklies of the San Francisco Bay Area. I ended up moving to New York to become R&B editor of Billboard, and then I was a music critic for the New York Times. I became music editor at Vibe. I could say this, as you get older, it just gets longer to tell your story. And my life isn't completely my jobs, but my life is very much about music and always has been. I went to my first concert at the age of 8. I saw the Jackson 5 at the Circle Star Theater in San Carlos, California, and I really feel like it set me on this path of writing about, editing, and creating content around music that I've been on for now, I would have to say, almost 30 years.
As I was reading this, I was thinking, my mother's in the audience, that I had to really give her a special shout out, because she took us and some family friends to see Michael Jackson, the Victory Tour at Comiskey
Yes.
Park in 1984. Like, That is so huge.
No, it's major, and I think it's so wonderful when the adults in our lives really bring music into our lives. Like the fact that you can say this, because I saw that tour too. And it's like the fact that you can say that and you have that feeling and those memories. It just really matters. I think that music in this era is a bit undersold actually with regard to how much effect it has on our soul and our spirit, and to be able to look back on those times and say, because I can think of going to see a Tribe Called Quest one time for work in Nashville, Tennessee, and I was so close to the stage I really could have touched Q-Tip's sneakers. I'm old now, so he's a friend, and he knows this ridiculous story, but I remember just feeling so blessed to be there, to hear them do their music up close and personal. I mean, come on.
I don't know if you're in the mood to read a passage.
Well, I'll have to put my glasses back on.
This was my favorite passage in the book, and I thought it would be great if you could share it with the
Okay. I can
audience.
tell now. All right. It always is emotional for me when I read from my book, but let's go.
So I marked it to where to start and where to end.
Okay, okay.
Page 181 if anyone wants to follow along.
That's it. Woo. My book really does. I have a podcast called Black Girl Songbook, in which I always try to give Black women in music the credit that they're due, and this is one of those series of paragraphs that tries to do that in Shine Bright. Few in the music business are ever truly shocked when a pop star dies before old age. It can seem payment to a savage piper. Dope is accessible, planes fall from the sky. And for Black artists caught up in the circular pattern of white artists being rewarded for mimicking Blackness and Black artists being maligned or short-sold for trying to sound like white artists who are trying to sound like them, it's easy to succumb to existential gloom. If there is banality and cynicism to be heard in pop music from whites and Blacks, this dehumanizing spin cycle is where it's born. It's young Black women dancing the Charleston with the glee of the newly free, and white women stealing their moves to become the beloved, free-spirited, and culture-shifting flappers of the 1920s. It's Elvis Presley slicking his hair back in a pompadour like Little Richard or Chuck Berry, who had straightened their hair to look like the silken white boy thatch held up by Americans as superior to glossy coils. It's Sex and the City's Carrie Bradshaw talking about, quote, wearing ghetto gold for fun. It's the Kardashian empire. It's the fact that Blackness has more value coming from white artists. This is so normal that if you are a Black artist and think of it too much, you go numb. And if you are this is
Can I read the last graph? And if you are a Black woman artist, in addition to being robbed, you must appear strong. You must bow to the tyranny of the swaying navel and maintain the 26-inch waist. Historically, you must put off childbearing children or hand off rearing them. Come last in pay and in credit given. Be called a whore or loose. Manage being a low-value target of physical and mental abuse and rape. And the cherry on top, all of this is known and documented, yet little changes. And then, because she loves her craft and it is her livelihood, the Black woman artist on alternate nights must sing the body electric and sing the blues because she's got them bad. So
as evident.
I thought that passage really summed up what you were trying to do with this book.
I appreciated it. It really was one of the harder sections to write because I feel like so much of what happens with black music, and in particular with the music and art of black women and work of black women, it just goes undocumented, that so many people just don't say the unvarnished truths of the matter. And so I wanted to get at those kinds of truths in Shine Bright overall, and this was a moment in that chapter where I was finally just like, I'm just gonna say it, even if it makes me emotional as I write it, even if it's going to make me emotional when I have to read it aloud. I'm just going to actually say it, and I'm glad you chose that.
Um, so as a little girl, I was in this is a really ridiculous talent show thing that I did at Family Reunion.
Okay.
I didn't sing, but I lip synced Whitney Houston, The Greatest Love of All, and really thought that that was some sort of talent.
It's a great choice of song.
And I thought she was so beautiful. And I might have been around third grade when her first album came out.
Yeah.
And we look at her, and reading this, it made me feel this. I feel guilty for mocking her in those later years.
I think it's Whitney's relationship with the public was such a roller coaster ride. I think it's very easy to forget, one, just how great she was, how singular of an artist she was, how much she contributed to American culture and definitely to American pop culture. It's easy to forget also how Whitney was not beloved from the outset, that Whitney Houston, when she started out, was much maligned for being a sellout, for sounding quote unquote white as an artist. It was very difficult for Whitney Houston on the flip side to get played on the pop/white stations, radio stations. So it's very easy to forget how hard it was for her. And I think that's why, as she succumbed to her addictions in later life, it was easy for many of us to be unsympathetic to her spiral. And I want to say it's unfortunate, but really it's quite tragic.
And as I was reading that chapter, and we're going to get to some joys.
Let's.
I actually had trouble sleeping that night because what Danyel, my favorite parts of the book are when she recounts the stories of being out to dinner and seeing people, or what it was like being an editor, like these personal stories that she has that aren't exploitive. And reading about Whitney, and then there's a section with Gerald Levert. And
Yeah.
I love the,
Yes.
pop, pop, pop goes my
Yes.
mind.
Casanova.
And your relationship with Eddie Levert and
Yes.
Gerald, and Eddie not feeling like he got the due.
Yes.
And I didn't know that his death was real. I thought it was I didn't know the details. So reading about their deaths and details that I didn't know, even what Whitney's, and this is not gratuitous in the book, but just how bad how scalded her body
Yes.
was.
It was. And that use
I
of
think it
scalded
gave more
is
humanity,
good.
I thought, to both of their lives.
I think scalded is an excellent way to characterize it. For Shine Bright, I really forced myself to do some of the things that I hadn't done, which is like read the coroner's report of Whitney Houston's death. And I don't just talk about it like, I can't believe her mouth was full of dentures when she died at her relatively young age, which is very, very sad. But I talk about like why it came to that and why we don't know black women's stories from beginning to the very end. And when I talk about, black women in pop, I also did weave in a few men in there. And I talk about Eddie Levert and his sons, Gerald Levert, who's already gone, and his other son, Sean Levert, who's already gone, and just how difficult it can be. Like, the book is called Shine Bright, and pop is a very shiny, bright things on a lot of, days. But behind it, I'm here to tell you, because I've been covering it pretty much since rap started, when rap was maligned as an art form, and now it's one of the most dominant art forms in the world. It can be a very ugly and hard business, and I think we just don't talk about it enough, how difficult it is on some of the artists.
I heard you on Sam Sanders, It's Been a Minute, talking about Janet.
Oh, she's my favorite. I said that about every single artist, though. Oh, Jody Watley, she's my favorite. Oh my God, Marilyn McCoo, she's my favorite. Like everybody is, oh my God, Mary J. Blige, she's my favorite. Everybody's my favorite.
Well, I also am a huge Janet fan, and have made my 6-year-old listen to all of Control recently. And Janet had her. Can you just talk about how, again, I don't think it's not as tragic as Whitney, but being beloved and then being blackballed. And now I feel like she's getting her due again, that people are understanding that Les Moons
Yeah.
blackballed her
Yes, from CBS.
after well, I think we all know Nipplegate.
The big, yeah. And you know, I just refuse to call it that. It should be called Justin Gate. I think that we forget how popular Janet Jackson was. I think we forget how many records she sold. I think we forget her impact on style and culture. I think we forget the constant competition between she and Madonna, like who sort of owned pop music at that time. Was it Madonna or was it Janet Jackson? Who was going to be the queen of pop? Who was going to be the queen of pop between even she and her brother? I think something that's so rarely discussed about Janet Jackson is the fact that she had the nerve, the absolute bravery and gumption to say, my brother is literally Michael Jackson, and so too shall I be as big as him. I will be as big as my brother, who was literally breaking records for most records sold, most money for a recording contract, just record upon record upon record, and also just amazingly gifted. And this is not to take away from who Michael is, and there's whole stories to be told about everything in the documentaries and all of that, but if we are just talking about his music and the impact it was having at that time, just the bravery and the gumption and the work ethic of Janet Jackson, for her to then be blackballed. There were congressional hearings about the Super Bowl moment, and after that she barely could get booked anywhere. And so she is coming back around now, but it's been decades that have been robbed from her, that she should have been elevated to even higher status in our culture than she is right now.
I really thought that podcast was the beginning of bringing her back, like getting
Yes.
her in the documentary on Lifetime.
Yes.
So I'm glad that she's
I am
getting more of that shine that should have never left her.
Should not have. She's relatively scandal free as a pop star until that moment. I mean, literally, she's the Ella Fitzgerald of her generation. It's like, if you want to have like a good role model, it's Janet Jackson. And then in that one moment, less than a second pretty much, to have all of that stripped from her, it's criminal. It's culturally criminal.
It's hard to imagine that, because you've been doing this so long, that anything surprises you. But as you were researching this book, did you come across anything that you're like, oh, I actually didn't know that about this artist?
It's not even just finding out things about particular artists, it's just finding out about a particular artist. Like I don't know who a reggae fan is in the audience. Are there any reggae fans in the audience? So is anybody familiar with Millie Small, who I do believe had the biggest reggae record in the world? This was pre-Bob Marley. And so I was like, I don't know, I'm not a big reggae head. And if someone says, listen to reggae, I'm gonna put Bob Marley on. That's really how narrow, he's obviously an icon, but there's way more to reggae, obviously, than just Marley and his family. But when I read about Millie and how she was the first artist signed to Island Records, and she moved to London from Jamaica and just kind of took over with that sort of a ska reggae sound, I just felt so blessed to then know about her. I didn't think about the Dixie Cups. Everyone's familiar with that song, Go into the Chapel, and I didn't think about really just put together in my mind that these were three girls from the projects of New Orleans who really just had a #1 pop hit as teenagers, and there's somebody who we don't really even know about their lives. It's one of the first #1 pop hits by a black act in the history of our country. But all we ever hear about, and God bless them, are the Supremes, which is why in Shine Bright also I choose to focus on Diana Ross's epic and unheralded solo career.
You know, and I probably am misreading it, but I felt a little ambivalence toward you about Diana Ross. Whoops.
Not for me, Natalie.
Okay.
I love Miss Ross. My thing is, I have ambivalence about Miss Ross because it is a tradition in my family to have ambivalence about Diana Ross. And that's because I believe, at least anecdotally, the evidence to me is that women of my mom's generation, a lot of them, remain somewhat angry at Diana Ross for leaving the Supremes. The Supremes represented, to my mom's generation, my mom is a black woman from Oakland, California. You know, she had opportunities, but not the opportunities that we have, and frankly, not the opportunities that your daughter's going to have. But the Supremes were all over the world looking glamorous and, you know, getting off of private planes and being on the Ed Sullivan Show and wearing these glamorous outfits and eyelashes and wigs and singing these amazing pop songs. And they were just like the perfect 3 black girls out of Detroit, Michigan. And all of a sudden, Diana Ross said, but you know something, I want more. And I want it very specifically for myself. It was barely allowed for the Supremes to be the Supremes when the Supremes were the Supremes. So for Diana Ross to step out and say, I want still more than that, I think really set people back on their heels. So my household was not a Diana Ross friendly household. I had to come back to Miss Ross on my own, and I do love her dearly.
But you also put in Stephanie Mills.
Yes! Man, Stephanie was robbed, wasn't she? I gotta put my mic down and wet my whistle for that one because, oh my goodness. This is the thing, it doesn't matter how many articles I write, how many podcasts I do, how many documentaries I produce. It's never enough. Like, I can literally speak for another 5 hours or more right now just about the career of Stephanie Mills, let alone just her performance of the song Home, which is a black girl national anthem, the talent show, like, bestseller for all time.
I knew not to sing that in the talent show.
Right? When I think of Home, I think of a place where love's overflowing. Even Barbra Streisand recorded Home. It's that great of a record, but do we ever talk about the fact that no one ever really changes the vocal arrangement of that song when they record it? Because why would you when Stephanie Mills is perfection? And Diana Ross did rob her of that role in the movie version of the play, which was massively successful and doesn't get spoken about enough. She was very much robbed. And I think also Stephanie Mills was robbed of an even bigger career because Stephanie Mills is 4'11" and chocolate, and she has the full lips and full nose of a black girl. And that's facts, and she'll tell you herself.
When, I don't know if anyone saw the Stephanie Mills, Shaka Khan versus, which was very painful.
It was.
Very painful. But before that, I told people, don't sleep on Stephanie Mills. I might like Shaka Khan's music better, but there's something about being on Broadway. You're going to perform, and Stephanie Mills smoked her.
Yes.
And was so gracious in uplifting her when
Amazing.
Shaka was inebriated.
Being challenged, yes. And we're in Shaka's hometown. God bless Shaka Khan. One of the greatest to ever do it. But we know that Shaka struggles with different things in her life. And not that Stephanie hasn't, just not the same things. It's like when you think about so many black women pop stars, you think, oh, everybody came out of the church. Well, a lot of people also came from the stage. Marilyn McCoo came from the stage. Donna Summer came from the stage. Stephanie Mills came from the stage. That's where that belting, that bigness of voice that can go to the rafters mixes in with that gospel training, and you get what we just can't get enough of, which is just like technical excellence and soul together in the same voice. And Stephanie Mills just has that. And she also has a bigness of spirit that's just very, very hard to resist.
So we're also in Jody Watley's hometown.
We are. Chicago is such a, you guys know, Chicago's such a music town. It is and always has been.
What were you trying to convey to the readers about Jody Watley? What did you want them to capture about her?
I mean, Jody Watley is a very special case. I mean, you know, Jody Watley came of age as a dancer on Soul Train. She was a part of the group Shalimar. I think Howard Hewitt was the leader of that group. He was groomed to be a solo star, at which he had little success. Beautiful voice, love Howard Hewitt. But the thing is, the star was right there, and the powers that be chose to ignore it. Her name is Jody Watley. Jody Watley, like so many black women performers, and black male performers for that matter, had to pretty much leave the country and get her life and come back. She went to London, she left the group, and she came back. And, you know, we forget, you know, we think about in The Terminator when Arnold Schwarzenegger says, "Hasta la vista, baby," right? We think that's the screenwriter's genius, and oh my God, it's Arnold Schwarzenegger's delivery. Well, it was really Jody Watley's delivery of that line. I'm looking for new love. Looking for real love. Hasta la vista, baby. She made that phrase so a part of culture that the screenwriter weaved it into the film, and then Arnold Schwarzenegger took it to the levels that he took it. But again, black women we don't get the credit for those moments. And we're not even gonna talk about her contributions to dance, her contributions to fashion, and also the sort of race, again, between she and Janet Jackson for just who was going to be that cool black girl pop star of that moment. They both come from the Prince family tree. Jody Watley was married to somebody.
She was married to one of the producers, Andre.
So Andre Simone, thank you. Both of y'all know it. I love that.
It's fresh from the book. I didn't know it beforehand.
And then Janet Jackson comes from the Prince family, obviously because of her creative partners, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis. But again, how often are black women artists even talked about as having trees like that, as coming from the same places? How often are Dionne Warwick, Whitney Houston, and Leontine Price linked as the dynasty that they are? They are all related by blood. Leontine Price is one of the biggest opera stars in the history of this country. She kicked down doors in opera before, I didn't even barely know what opera was, honestly. And so I learned so much about opera writing, Shine Bright. But if they were white women, they would be linked as a dynasty, and we would be talking about them, and there would be 17 documentaries about them right now. Leontine Price, Dionne Warwick, and Whitney Houston
That was shocking
are related by blood.
That was so surprising. I had no idea that Leontine Price was in that family tree.
Yes, absolutely. Straight out of Mississippi. Sissy Houston, let's put Sissy in there. Thank you, everybody. And there's a whole chapter in there really that breaks down Sissy and her creative partners, her background, and really their foreground singers in Shine Bright, where I talk about just how much, man, Sissy Houston, even she does not get the credit that she gets for her contributions to American pop and international pop, standing behind all of these different white rock stars and black singers also. But just the training of Whitney Houston is accomplishment beyond measure. She trained Whitney Houston, really, really one of, if not the voice of the 20th century.
I want to go back to something you mentioned briefly. Why did you open the book with Phyllis Wheatley?
I opened the book with Phyllis Wheatley because this is a very personal history of black women in pop. And Phyllis Wheatley is very personal to me. I come from a very, let's call it, for politeness' sake, very tense family situation when I was growing up. But I was blessed to have amazing teachers in my life. And one of my teachers was Mrs. Blatt, who I'm still in touch with. And she had a reading area in her class, and every month we were focused on something or somebody. And one month we were focused on Phyllis Wheatley. You know how you have teachers that go above? Let me tell you, she had the stars in the sky, and she made it seem like when Phyllis Wheatley was coming over the middle passage by herself as an 8-year-old, that somehow the stars were giving her some comfort. And when I learned about Phyllis Wheatley and how as she became the first black published poetry, this was in pre-revolutionary America, still during slave times, and how when she was in her early 20s, she went back across the Atlantic. Again, like I just said, like so many black women creatives have to go to Europe to sort of get their creative life. And then she came back to Boston because that's where her masters were, her only family that she knew. To me, Phyllis Wheatley is our first pop star. When she was in London, she sang her poems all around at these different literary salons, and she just, how did she manage that? I don't even know, like it's in the 1700s. Like what are we doing? So to me, she's the very beginning of us as black women creatives in this country.
And she used to sing her poems.
She used to sing her poems. When she was in London, she tried to do it in the 13 colonies. It wasn't really accepted that well in Boston and around Boston. But when she got to London, which is not perfect, it certainly wasn't perfect for black people back then, nor is it now, but there was something just a little bit different in that space that allowed her to perform. And I did so much research about this. The newspapers were calling her like a genius from behind bars, or the enslaved, poetess, and all these things. But she did it, and she was beloved, and she was actually more beloved in Europe than she was here. And how many times have you heard black artists from James Baldwin on down say, I felt more comfortable over there than I did in my native country? So she is at the center, at the beginning. And it's just a short little chapter, it's just a short little beginning, but I wanted Phyllis's life to be in there.
We have some pre-selected audience questions, but before I get to them, I would like for you to reflect on what it was like to be a black female editor in in a rough and tumble industry.
Oh, boy.
You read the passage about the tribulations of being a black female artist, but it's not like you weren't threatened.
Oh, yeah. And as we will do, I will just play that down and act like it wasn't a big of deal as it was. But I came of age in the 90s. Rap music and covering it and being responsible for others covering it. Man, it was a tough space to be in as a woman. But I gave it everything I had, and I would not change it for the world. Have I been threatened because of magazine content? Absolutely. Have I been assaulted? Absolutely. But I had things to do, and so I did them.
So one of the questions is, as you uncover details about the way so many black women artists faced erasure and so many other things, did you find yourself getting angry? As a reader, I had to pause so many times.
Okay, wait, repeat that one more time, Natalie.
As you uncovered details about the way so many black women artists faced erasure and so many other things, Did you find yourself getting angry? As a reader, I had to pause so many times.
Oh, yes. Angry, and you see it doesn't take much to make me cry. You know it was a struggle getting done. Um, yes. I would be so mad. My husband's here. He'll tell you. I would come marching into his office going, did you know such a, and he's a music journalist himself. I said, did you? And he'd be like, well, he did or he didn't know. But yes, I'm stomping around my house just like, I didn't know that these journalists from the 1950s used to talk to these black women singers with such disrespect. I didn't know that. I watched so many old recordings of interviews. You know, whether it's Gladys Knight, whether it's Nancy Wilson, whether it's Nat King Cole, whether it's Whitney Houston and Diane Sawyer, and I'm a fan of Diane Sawyer, honestly. But that crack is whack. When you go back to it, it's ruthless. It's so ugly. No sympathy at all for Whitney's addiction, none whatsoever. So yes, I got mad and I got sad, but at the same time, I've also had a lot of practice, just covering this stuff and editing stuff just over my career that did kind of prepare me for it and also set me up to know where to look for it. I was actually very happy on a lot of days to have the time to do the research and the work around these women because not enough has been done. And I hope there's some writers, and I see one, that are gonna pick up the stick because y'all got about only a few more good years from me. I'm about to put my feet up in this thing. Like, I want to just read more. I want to think more, and I want others really to pick up the baton and really do the everyday work of covering black women's creative lives. We are so underexplored. I use this word all the time. It is criminal. It is culturally criminal. It is.
This might be the hardest question.
Oh no.
What is your favorite romance song by a black female artist?
Why are y'all asking me these ridiculous questions?
It wasn't this audience.
Oh, it wasn't?
No.
Okay, good. Y'all are forgiven.
They were submitted days ago.
Okay, y'all are forgiven. My favorite song of all time is Gladys Knight's. Gladys Knight and the Pips' 1973 Midnight Train to Georgia. It doesn't change. It's never going to change. I come from a hip-hop generation. Do I have songs from Mary J. Blige that I get my whole life through? Absolutely. I love Ella Mai right now. I love Shaka. I love Stephanie Mills. Whitney Houston is in my heart forever and a day. But if you're asking me my favorite song of all time, and this includes all rap songs, and I love rap. Are you kidding me? Like, I will argue with you all day long. I didn't even write about rap in this book because if I got started, it would have taken over. And I may yet write about it.
That's the next book.
Hopefully. But the writer in me cannot help but respond to the story of Midnight Train to Georgia.
But Danyel, can you go back? Because the book is also just full of fun facts that you can use at dinner parties. What was the original name of that song? What is the origin of Midnight Train to Georgia?
Midnight Train to Houston. Midnight Plane to Houston.
Midnight Plane to Houston.
Yes, yes. It was written by the same guy. It's a white guy who wrote country and western songs. And he wrote a song about midnight, taking a midnight plane to Houston. And he wrote it because he was friends with, how many people remember the $6 Million Man? Remember Lee Majors? I used to love him as Heath in Big Valley. So the guy who wrote the song, whose name is escaping me just a second, he called Lee Majors because they were friends. Lee Majors was at that time married to who? Farrah Fawcett. So Farrah Fawcett picks up the phone. And he says, oh, how are you doing, Farrah? Where's Lee? He said, oh, Lee is playing tag football somewhere. Okay, this is the details that I know. And he said, okay, well, what are you doing? And she said, I'm actually throwing, because she's from Texas. She said, I'm actually throwing some clothes in a bag. I'm about to jump on a midnight plane to Houston. And that stuck in his brain. So he wrote that song. He gave that song to Cissy Houston, Whitney Houston's mom, to sing. And she recorded it. And I love Cissy, I do, but it's just all right. And so then from Cissy, it went to the Gladys Knight and the Pips. and Gladys Knight and the Pips are from Atlanta, Georgia. And so that's why, and they changed train because the Pips were like, black people are really way more on trains than on planes at that time. So that is why the song is called Midnight Train to Georgia. But even I first heard the song as a kid. I was 8 years old when it came out. And I liked the story. I was a storyteller even back then, writing little stories, keeping a journal. But my thought has always been this, is that Gladys Knight does not get on the train with her man. In my mind, I feel like everyone else is like, she goes back with him to Georgia. My thought is that she packed him a lunch. And she got him to the station. And God bless him, I'm sure he's a very nice man. But he's the one that pawned all his hopes and even sold
I wish you could play it
his
right
old
now.
car and bought a one-way ticket back to the life that we knew. But never in the song does she say that she's on the train. And I also noticed, and the vocal arrangement on that song is beyond perfection between she and the Pips. It's a conversation, as it is in almost any Gladys Knight and the Pips record. But when she says, I'll be with him, I feel the Pips really step on her. I know you will. It's like, hey, man. Hey, I'll be with him in spirit. Always be right here. That song is a LA song. I'm a LA girl, I'm a California girl, I'm an Oakland girl. It says, Hollywood proved too much for the man. I used to live like near Hollywood as a kid. And Hollywood is not lights. Hollywood is grimy and it's just right around the corner when you live in LA. So I love that record and I love thinking of her standing on that train platform even now. And Gladys has talked about the reason why there's so much emotion in her voice in that song is because she was thinking about her first husband. It's a contentious relationship, to say the least. Her brother had to beat up that husband and get him off the tour because he was beating Gladys. Gladys tells this story. I'm not breaking any rules here. But she loved him. And that's who she was thinking about. And you just know in her real life, she didn't get on the train. And so that story just has resonance to me from when I'm 8 to right now.
Our time is up now.
Okay. Y'all are a pleasure.
But Danyel's going to be signing books.
Thank you to
on, Zola.
Natalie, and thank you to Natalie so much. Thank you to the whole book festival. Thank you to Ms. Zola, who looks like she's making her way. And I'm signing books at NN Nancy Nancy. Please come back and join me.